we have the pleasure of taking the post-lunch slot when everyone is fully carved up and feeling like going to sleep. And to make matters even more exciting, we're going to be talking about risk. Now, I'd like to start by asking the esteemed panel I have with me here. We'll do some introductions in a minute, but first, to set the tone, what excites you, Guillaume, about the subject of risk?
Our subject of risk is because you have a lot of challenges. That's why it's exciting to solve and to resolve all the issues that you can have about the challenges on the AI.
Good. Rui?
So nothing excites me about risk. I don't find risk exciting at all. However, you have to address it if you're going to get any AI live in production. So it's kind of, how do I think about it? It's a bit like car insurance.
Yeah.
Have to have it, have to get it right.
But nobody wants it.
It's not exciting, but it's an essential, and it is absolutely essential.
So I'm anxious by nature. So providing controls against risk gives me personally a lot of inner peace. Bringing that to AI with the novel risks that it proposes and the whole new shift in mentality that you need to adopt is really exciting to me. And also trying to make that exciting for people is a fun challenge.
Good. Now wing the mic down here. Thank you. Good. All right. So if anyone has any questions as we go through this, please feel free to raise your hand high in the sky. And do we have a roaming mic, or am I going to be on my feet up and down? Well, we'll work it out. Don't worry. I can do that. No problem. All right. Cool. So maybe it'd be helpful. I've been speaking to people over the last few days, and the talks that seem to have resonated mostly are the talks that focus on lessons learned, insights gathered, practical things that people who are building AI agents today can take away and do something about. So before we get onto risk and governance, which we will do, I thought it might be useful to maybe share with people some of the things that you've been working on initially, and then we can get into what are some of the lessons that you've learned during that process. So maybe we can start with, if you still share that mic, we'll start from the other end this time. So Adrian, tell us a little bit about what you've been working on at EIR Finance, what you've been doing with generative AI, what do you have in production right now? Just give us a little bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of what you've been up to.
Absolutely. So I was fortunate enough to start my career in open source machine learning operations. So I was close to AI kind of from the beginning of my career. And then stepping into in the last year and a half, I've built a lot in the area of conversational frameworks, but not necessarily just focused on chatbots. So a big part of it is operational costs through chatbots, through AI-assisted customer support. But we've also developed a couple of conversational systems for investigation of fraudulent transactions. We've built a couple of conversational systems for enhanced spending analytics that a customer can interact with to discover what they want to know about their spending, not what we think that they might know about it. So it really defines itself kind of, it's starting to fizzle through every single part of the customer journey in the credit card application, not just customer support. So expanding from that in the last few months has been really exciting for us.
Brilliant. Rui, what about you?
So I've been working, I've been at Lloyd's for about 8-9 years, something like that. Been working on various deterministic chatbots for about the first 7 years of that. The last 3 years have been pretty much focused on generative AI, LLMs. Started off very low risk, introduced an LLM into our deterministic chatbot as a secondary classifier. So when the main classifier doesn't understand the customer's intent, we go to a large language model, small large language model, which just spits back an intent, and we go back into the deterministic journey. We've been adding summarization into our support agents. So when they pick up a chat, they have a summary of the chat, reduces the average handling time. So we've been kind of chipping away at our big retail support chatbot with generative features for about 2.5 years. And over the last year, have been working on an agentic investment assistant. Really precise scope. It is for people who are new to investing and it's an education piece. So it's getting people from don't know anything at all about investing to understand, ironically, the risks in investing, as well as kind of the different kind of products, different ways of going about investing. The scope is really specific to getting people to the point where they're comfortable to start investing. We're not getting into transactions, and the tightrope that one particularly walks in terms of risk is that financial advice is a regulated activity in the UK. You can't give financial advice for free. You have to be registered. Now, Lloyds does have registered financial advisors, but the agent will not be a registered financial advisor, so it can't give advice. So we have to navigate giving guidance without straying into advice, which actually is a whole additional area of risk on top of the hallucination, etc. risks.
And one of the things you kind of touched on there is that over the examples that you gave of how you've introduced generative AI into the Lloyds Banking virtual assistant is a lot of it initially has been behind the scenes, isn't it? So is that part of managing risk? Is that generative AI doing things under the hood as opposed to generating content for the end user? Was that part of managing the risk of rolling this out, or is that just coincidentally that's how the use case is?
No, that was entirely deliberate. So 3 years ago, we had an exec that were not as AI forward as they are now, should we say? And there was a lot of concern about the risk around LLMs and generative AI. So we very deliberately picked our use cases, starting with lowest risk. The LLM classifier, it was a beautiful risk story because the worst that could happen with that classifier was what was currently happening before we employed the classifier. It only had upside. There was zero downside. So a very easy conversation with our risk colleagues. We're a bank, so risk is not new. AI risk is new, but we have whole divisions of people dedicated to understanding what risks exist, sizing those risks, and understanding the impact of mitigations and controls on those risks.
Nice. Guillaume, tell us a little bit about what you've been working on and what you have going on.
Yeah, at Carrefour, I'm a data architect at the headquarters of Carrefour. So Carrefour is one of the major retailers in Europe and in the world. And I'm also a Google developer expert on Google Cloud. That means I am recognized by Google as being an expert, and so I know very well the platform. And I like to play with the new tools and the new services of Google Cloud. And because the new services have been released recently with Gemini, ADK, Vertex AI, RAG Engine, and stuff like this, I like to play with this. And I started to build something for my colleagues as a data platform, and more generally internally for Carrefour, because as a data platform, we are the central place to ingest the data and consume the data. And so I built a data platform assistance that help people to understand how to pull and push the data to the data platform. And because we are speaking about risk, to mitigate the risk, in fact, this chatbot is only open internally, and it's only for the documentation on how to access and how to use or interact with the data platform, so the risk on the business is very low.
That seems to be a trend, and I thought that kind of would be something that I remember in, let's say, 2023, I think it was, I was hearing stories from JP Morgan and eBay and IKEA, who are all using generative AI internally in use cases like that, which is for colleagues, to help colleagues do various tasks and search various information and stuff like that. I thought that kind of more agentic approach would have made it into the customer channels a lot sooner than it perhaps has, because still most of the companies you speak with are still in the process of thinking, well, we're working on generative AI, we're doing it, we're getting it out there type of thing. But Adrian, we were talking earlier about some of the use cases that you have. You've managed to get end-to-end, more or less. I know there's some determinism in there, which we can talk about, but how have you managed to go, beyond internal use cases to customer-facing generative applications, and what is that process like in terms of managing business expectations of deploying that kind of stuff?
Right, so we've got 7 agents, customer-facing agents in production right now, carrying out various actions on the customer account. And I think slowly and carefully is the way we approached it. So what we did is we started with a wider business goal of what are we trying to really achieve here with AI. We're not just trying to use AI for the sake of using AI, but we have a very clear business goal of we're trying to reduce this cost, we're trying to make this process a little bit faster, and at the time, it was about customer support. We established a RAG model that was non-agentic, and obviously that was basically an FAQ on steroids. And we realized that it doesn't do the trick in terms of the cost that we want. And customers came to the agent with very clear intentions to run certain actions on their accounts that they would usually do from or through a customer support agent. So that spans from getting details about, when is my next payment due date? I'm struggling to see it in the app. How much do I owe given that I'm accruing this much in interest in this statement and whatnot? And obviously a RAG model cannot access that data. From that point onwards, it was a race of isolating the very sensitive data that the customers are looking for, but also offering it to them without feeding it into a wider AI system. And we started that with the least sensitive possible data that we could feed to an agent. We launched a very small agent that simply goes, retrieves that data, gives it back to the customer in a generated answer, right? So technically no two answers are the same, even though words will be similar. And that gave us a bit of confidence. And then we did an agent that's a little bit better and more powerful. Then we made an agent that allows a customer to close their account. And that started evolving to the point of now we have agents that understand when customers are flagged as suspects for potential fraudulent activity or suspicious activity and take necessary actions based on that. And that takes a high level of care and precision because you really don't want to tell somebody that we're investigating, oh, we're investigating you, right? But it's more about how do we get you to hold, how do we get you to give us information while being positive, and also while ensuring that you do still have a positive experience, because even though you're suspicious, you're still our customer and you still need to be valued, and if that suspicion clears, we don't want you to move away. It took about a year and a half to get to this agentic level that we have right now. Our latest agent helps people in precarious debt situations, so people who cannot make their next payment. That takes a very high level of precision on the LLM side because they need to understand when a customer is vulnerable. I think it's not necessarily just due to regulation, but in finance in general, at Yaya, we believe that if a customer is in a precarious financial situation, it is our duty as people before a company to put them in touch with a real person who can give them empathy. But if it's a case of non-vulnerability, but simply, my car broke down, I cannot make my payment this month, we do have a model that can evaluate that situation, investigate it with a high level of accuracy, and in certain cases, only in certain cases, make a decision. The key takeaway from that, we were realistic in our goals. We didn't want agents to cover the whole process end to end, but we wanted it to cover 5%, then 10%, then 20%. And we stopped at about 55, right? And we're very happy with it as it is right now. There's still a human element that's essential.
Nice. I'll throw, now that we've got a little bit of context, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, please do raise your hands and I will perform the activity of mic runner and come round circulating. If not, we will come back to you shortly. One of the things that surprised me about this panel is that, Guillaume, you're the only one here with a full head of hair. So what has surprised you about deploying generative AI agents? What has been surprising good about it? You can have this one, sorry.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so for the hair, it's genetics. So my parents, it's not, it's not me. What surprised me in agentic? That's
Deploying.
Okay, deploying.
What surprised you?
Yeah, in fact, for me, in deploying, deploying or maybe building agents is very easy and simple. Today, the models, the LLMs are very good. The framework are very nice. It's state of the art. It's open source. It's great. So building an agent it's easy. And in our case, we are building an agent in a few hours, few days. But we would like to integrate these agents close to our users. And today, the users discuss with the data platform team through Google Chats. And we would like to integrate these agents to Google Chats. And here the problem comes. because Google Chat APIs are not so good, and I love Google, but Google APIs are not so good, or it's a nightmare. And yes, and we would like to integrate the agents the closest to the users to be sure to keep them, or to let them interact with the agents in a natural way, and not to ask the users to go in another website, another platform to interact with an agent. We like to have something and integrate it seamlessly, and that's the most difficult part. And in fact, it's the integration part, the legacy or traditional IT parts that were the most difficult, and not the AI and agentic part. The agentic part was not without any risk or any changes in the test. For example, the testing is different, but it's not so difficult to build and deploy. And the deployment is really focused on the integration part.
Go on, were you going to say something?
I was just going to jump in on the same question.
All right, yeah, go on, go on.
But first, I had a full head of hair and a man bun when I started working with conversational AI, so that's just a warning to anyone out there with a full head of hair early in career. I think for me, the thing that surprised me the most is how difficult the design is, or how different the design is from designing deterministic experiences. I think I mentioned yesterday in my talk that we have brilliant, experienced conversation designers in our lab, but our first foray into a fully generative experience, the design stuff particularly was really wobbly early on, where the work is kind of almost backwards. The metaphor that I kind of came to was that when you're building a deterministic chatbot, you start with a completely empty space, and you add intents, and you add training, and you add dialogue, and you add dialogue nodes, and you gradually build up the chatbot that you want. On day one, your chatbot doesn't do anything at all. So it doesn't say hello, can't answer any questions. And over time, as you build things, its capabilities increase. A generative or agentic chatbot that is sitting on top of a large foundation model starts with absolutely immense capability. It will answer any question at all that you want. So it's back to front. It's not about what capabilities do we want to put in. It's about how do we restrict, how do we limit, how do we constrain, which is completely upside down to how you normally build. And I think the surprise for me was how difficult we found that. As a really experienced team, really know chatbots, really know AI, loads of really good people, but it was still that fundamental, how do we design this thing, it took some working out.
Yeah, design and test, because it's not deterministic. So to test and to reproduce your test and to be sure that the new version is better than the previous one is very hard.
100%. And in fact, I've been starting to formulate a concept for agentic development that is based on software development and on test-driven development. So you define your scope and your requirements up front. You're always going to do that first anyway, because otherwise you don't know what you're doing. Before you get to any prompting, before you get to any knowledge base building, I think the next step is write all of the tests that will evidence that your requirements have been met. Because that is hard. And actually, once you've got into the prompting and once you're to and froing with this synthetic personality that you're creating, it can get a little bit confusing, a little bit muddy. So I'm thinking, actually, define your requirements, build out your tests, at which point, when these tests reach a certain threshold, you know that you're delivering against your requirements, and then at that point, start writing your both your positive prompting, but also your constraining prompting, start building out your knowledge base, and one by one, your tests start passing. Once all your tests are passed, then you know you've arrived. Because you're right, it's really hard to know, is it better? And it's really hard to know, is it done?
Yeah.
Are we there? Can we move on from this feature and move on to the next thing?
Is it ready to go live? We've been talking a lot about that, isn't it? Test-driven development. And I think that part of the problem that I find is that because you start from that foundational immense capability, it's almost like a bonsai tree, kind of pruning it back and pruning it back. But because you have that innate understanding at the beginning, there's a temptation that, well, the models will take care of everything. And therefore, what you see is that people's, I think, lack of design-led thinking ends up with a prompt that describes what it should do, doesn't account for what it shouldn't do, but also doesn't account for the gaps. And in the gaps where you haven't defined anything, one might say that that's the area that LLMs can be creative, whereas in actual fact, I would argue that that's the areas where the LLM is making judgments on your business process that you haven't been able to define yet. Whereas if you start from that point of view of saying, well, what tests do we need to pass in order for this thing to go live or for this thing to be sustainable or what have you, you end up kind of doing the job of figuring out what is this thing for, what are the goals, what are the users' goals, and how do we know we've achieved them, which it seems to be the thing that's lacking. So the act of writing those tests is essentially the act of defining the objectives of the thing, which seems to be a bit lacking.
Exactly that. And I think there's a role for AI in that process as well, not just in the delivery of the agent. I've been spinning up tools that will, for example, take a scope, take a knowledge base, take a prompt, and analyze them all against each other and identify, well, your prompts, your scope says that you should know about topic X, but there's nothing about topic X in your knowledge base, so maybe you want to extend that. Or your scope says you shouldn't be dealing with topic Y, there's nothing in your prompting about that, so maybe you need to extend your prompts. So I think there'll be, based on a few hours of playing with Claude Code that I've done, I'm sure there are going to be tools that are going to be coming which will do a lot of this analysis, a lot of this comparison, and even like automatically build out the knowledge bases and automatically build out the prompts based on that kind of analysis as well.
Go on, Adrian.
So one thing about testing that I find really interesting is that AI brings about the need to establish a continuous testing pipeline. While before in a deterministic flow, you would be able to design a PyTest, you run it a few times, you make sure that it passes, and then you can kind of have that trust that if you add to that software, the test from before will more or less stand in place. Whereas with conversational systems, what we've done is we've identified that adding to the prompt of a system that before worked in a certain way can completely change its charisma, its attitude, or what we call within the team, its vibe, right? And so whenever a change happens, I think it's essential to have a continuous testing pipeline that ensures consistency in even what used to work before. And sometimes with model switches or with upgrades or with infrastructure challenges that you might run into, things can change even if you personally don't add anything or remove anything from that prompt. And so this kind of unpredictability, while it makes testing automatable with AI, I think also creates the need for a very different approach to what a test is, and it makes it continuous. Kind of, we had DevOps, we have MLOps, now probably we're going to start introducing test ops, where we keep augmenting the data sets that we feed into the test, and where we keep looking at the same output multiple times with the same input, and we see that it's different every single time, but does it fit the vibe? So I think it changes the jobs that QA engineers do, but I don't think it'll make them obsolete.
Mm. What's interesting is, like, I remember I used to do a lot of work in government, and there was a big kind of like mandate at the time around like accessibility. All websites had to become accessible. You got to be able to use it with a screen reader and a keyboard and all that kind of stuff. And when you kind of really get into accessibility, you realize that when you make something more accessible to people that require those accessibility features, you actually make it better for everybody. And there's another kind of concept in terms of like copywriting, which is dumbing it down is opening it up, which means if you get rid of the jargon and you make it sound as simple as you possibly can, you're technically speaking, you're dumbing it down, but you're opening it up because the average reading age or whatever is like 9 years old or something, so more people can understand it. So the thing around making things more accessible, as a knock-on effect of doing that, it makes things better for everyone. So you could argue that good design practice is actually just to make it more accessible. And I think I'm hearing the same type of things here, which is, why is testing important? Well, it's because we don't want the risk of this thing making the wrong tool call and getting the action wrong or making a mistake. And so the testing could be perceived at one angle to be a risk mitigation strategy. But actually, it's a design practice really, because you want to make sure that what you're building does what it needs to do for your users. So where do you draw the line between this is an initiative that's about managing risk versus this is an initiative that's about making good applications?
Allow me to just start that in 30 seconds by expressing my product management philosophy, which I think guides my entire career, and I hope everyone else takes it. A lot of times when I speak to colleagues, even at the conference or in talks, I see people very excited to build things with AI. I see teams very excited to take a tool into consideration. But I think the best and the only question you should always ask when adopting any tool is what's the best thing for the user? It's not about your excitement at building it, it's about delivering something to an audience that has a need. If you satisfy that need with AI or without it, and if you're concerned, truly, sincerely caring about that, about satisfying that need and delivering it in a way that's easy, in a way that is accessible to them, then I think every process flows naturally. Risk flows naturally because you don't want it to go wrong. QA flows naturally because you want it to work. Design flows naturally because you want them to be able to interact with it. So it always starts with the intention, do I want to serve a user, or do I just want to have my fun with my tools? And those are two very different paradigms that really make the difference between good AI product and bad AI product.
How do you make a decision then in terms of where the boundaries should be drawn in terms of what the generative AI models can do versus what a deterministic system can do? Because on that scale you've got, we just get a bit of content wrong. It's not the best experience, but it won't kill you unless it's like, you know, the example of DHL or whatever that was making up poems about competitors or whatever. So you've got content, then you've got like thousands of customers affected, millions of pounds worth of damage or what have you. But then there's that area in the middle could be as grey as this table, because there's all kinds of processes that you have. Some are tied to finances, some are not. It's all arguably, in your case, tied to some finance somewhere, because you're dealing with customers' accounts and whatnot. So how do you make a decision then in terms of how much are we willing to go in terms of leveraging Gen AI versus where do we need more determinism and control?
So two-part answer to that. In terms of, so risk assessment is something that the bank's been doing for probably hundreds of years now. So looking at risks, sizing them, working out how, we use a matrix. One axis of the matrix is likelihood. How likely is this going to happen? Has this already happened, or is definitely going to happen in the next 6 months? All the way down to this is not going to happen in the next 5 years, but it might happen at some point in the distant future. The other axis of the matrix is how much damage would it cause, and we run a scale from less than £1 million to over £100 million, and some stops in between. So each individual risk is looked at individually usually by a group of people, and we work out where in that matrix that risk sits. Is this something that's definitely going to happen in the next 12 months, but even if it happens, it's going to be less than £1 million worth of damage? That's a relatively low risk in terms of Lloyd's view on risk. When you start connecting to customer data, if you start taking autonomous action, you start pushing both the likelihood up. It's more likely to happen, something's going to go wrong, and also you start pushing the value of the potential harm that would happen. We have a number. I'm not going to talk about it here. I won't talk about the actual numbers in the matrix, but each position in the matrix has a number, and we have a threshold. Below a certain threshold, it's fine. We'll put some controls around it. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll make sure it doesn't cause too much damage. Doesn't happen too often. We'll try to minimise the likelihood of it happening. At the other end of the scale, if it's above a certain number, we're just not going to do it. The stuff in the middle is where it gets interesting. That is all around. So you look at a risk and you score it and you give it an inherent risk. If we don't do anything to control this risk, this is the score that comes out. Usually with AI, those scores tend to be quite high because the likelihood is usually pretty high. And then we think about how can we control that risk? How can we mitigate it? How can we reduce it? Can we put guardrails in that can identify it happening and stop it going out? Can we put a post-mop-up process that even if it does go wrong, we mop it up and therefore it doesn't do the harm that it could do if we didn't have that process? And by thinking about how you can mitigate each individual risk, you then come to what we call a residual risk score. So this is the inherent risk minus the impact of the controls that you think you've made, and that gives you your residual risk score, and those residual risk scores are what we make decisions on. So something could be like really likely to happen, and it would be really damaging if it did, but if we can put enough stuff around it to reduce that likelihood down to it's really unlikely to happen more than once or twice a year, and we can bring down the potential scale of the challenge. One way we do that is by limiting audience. So we will pilot with a really small group of customers. That limits how much damage it could do. Do that for a while, you get a better understanding of likelihood, and then you can push out to more. So it's really about identifying the inherent risk, thinking what you could do to mitigate that, working out what risk remains after you've mitigated, and that gives us some numbers that we, across everything that we do, then is a go or no go.
Brilliant. That is a really good framework. Unfortunately, I forgot to take notes. Can you just say all that again? That's really good. So that's big financial risk at stake there. What areas of risk outside of financial, Guillaume, do you consider when you come to build these things?
Yeah. In fact, in the retail industry, we are not so we do not have the same process as in bank. So the risks are there, but we are more pragmatic in terms of delivery. And I will speak about my project, but more about our e-commerce website. We have an agentic agent. We are the first in France to deliver agentic assistance for making your drive, your e-commerce shopping on our website. But at the beginning, we opened it to only a few customers. Now it's open only to customers that order at least one time in a month over the 3 past months, to be sure that it's not open to anyone. It's only open to loyal customers. And like this, we can have more and more feedback and more inputs from the real world and the real performances of the agents. And like this, we can gather more and more data and correct by small touch our agents. Making an analysis like in the banking in a so dynamic ecosystem with agents, you analyze one LLMs and 6 months after it's outdated because the new one is released. We prefer to have something more pragmatic and to test like this. And yes, and to constraint like the likelihood, in fact, is that for us is the perimeter of the range of customers is limited. Like this, we limit also the likelihood of the risks.
I'll come to you in 1 second, Adrian. One of the kind of like at the moment we're talking about a lot of things that kind of I would describe it as almost wrangling with non-deterministic technology to try and make it deterministic is kind of what we're talking about here. You know, we want to try and make sure that it follows the rules all the time. We want to make sure that it doesn't say something it shouldn't to our customers. So, you know, for the applications that you're all working on, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have a boundary and a lane, and they're supposed to do this thing and do it well and do it every time. Might not be the same every time, but they're supposed to achieve the outcome every time. If you take a step forward and if you look at, you know, where the technology is going, that concept of autonomous agents or multi-agent systems that essentially are triggered by one thing and go away and complete tasks on your behalf. Good example is, you know, Claude Code. You mentioned Claude Code earlier. That's brilliant at just having a task. It starts to go through it. It recognizes that it's making mistakes and it's done something wrong. It tests what it's done. It recognizes what's gone wrong. It goes back and does it again. And it's not fully autonomous because it will check in every now and then, but it's got that flavor of something that is a bit more autonomous, something that hasn't been purposefully and diligently designed from front to back. Do you see those type of autonomous agents having a place and a role to play, or is it that you think that more diligent design, purposeful, narrow applications are still going to be where it's going to be for the foreseeable? Adrian, we'll start with you.
Very good question. I would say yes to both of those things. So if I look through the fog of kind of the next 2-3 years, I do see that technology catching a more robust shape in production, with the caveat that output validation is the only responsible way to adopt it. So you create a set of autonomous agents, you still need to take a human good damn look at your output to make sure that it's right. And it needs to be consistent. Perhaps you start every day, then you go every other day, then every week, then every month. But I do not see right now a near future where we can just pop them into production, let them do their thing, and we just trust that. For one particular reason, and there's a concept I'd like to introduce into the conversation because I'm very curious of everybody's views, and that is accountability, and especially legal liability. From the minute you launch a piece of software into production, you cannot hold it accountable for bad consequences. It is a tool that you as a team develop, deploy, and are responsible for. It's like sending, well, I'm not going to make military analogies, but you see where I'm going with this, right? So until we find an answer to the philosophically political question of who is accountable when AI does things wrong, which it will continue to do because it's a piece of statistics, it'll never reach 100%, we do need to take accountability into the question. And while accountability is into question, human validation remains essential, period.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I can, in terms of accountability, totally agree. Lloyd's takes a very analog approach to this. Someone in the organisation takes on the risk for every bit of AI that we do. Not one person taking on the risk for all of the AI, but each AI piece of work, whether it's a whole agentic bot, whether it's a framework, whether it's just adding a feature into our deterministic bot. Any change action that has risk associated with it, that risk will roll up to a named individual. It's usually someone quite senior. Quite often they don't entirely know everything that's going on. They're kind of dependent on a few layers of reporting up and get more summarized information about what's going on rather than like, here's the code that's running. But yeah, risk rolls up to individuals. Accountability does.
Yeah, about autonomous agents, we are at the beginning. We're experimenting right now internally to see how can autonomous agent can help us. And in fact, our main principle right now, and I have the same idea as Adrian, is when you get the data with MCP or another API, no problem to get the data and to analyze the data with the agents. But when you want to perform an action, to insert, to create data, to update or to delete data, you need to have a human review first to be sure that the action is legit to be achieved. And maybe after a while, after months, you start to trust your agent, and because you trust it, you can say, okay, every time you have to create this entry in my database, no problem, you can do it because I trust you. But like an employee, in fact, you need to first test it, and when you trust your agent, your employee, you can delegate tasks, and it could be autonomous. But right now, you need to be cautious with this. And maybe I have also another risk, maybe later, it's about consciousness. It's not really the conscious of the machine and stuff like this. Is if you have someone, an employee, that do, I don't know, answer 2 emails from provider at Carrefour, 2 emails per day, okay, analyze the emails, send some data, and okay. If the agent do it 10, 20, 50 times a day, for the agent, it's normal. He will repeat and again and again and again. If you delegate this to a human, 2 tasks per day, okay, 5 is strange, 10 is not normal, and this consciousness of what you have to achieve and the usual business that you have day to day, a human can detect a change or an anomaly. Right now, an agent is autonomous task by task, and you can't have this kind of observability or stuff like this. For me, it's another risk about these autonomous actions.
Very good, very good. Anyone have a question? Anyone else? Okay? No? All right, good, we'll carry on. What are some of the best practices in terms of kind of like risk mitigation or successful deployments that we are doing today that you think will be obsolete or naive in 12 months' time?
I just talked about trust. In fact, yes, today I can't trust the LLM because I had this kind of issue in October. In fact, after 3 months during the summer, my agent worked very, very well. And in October, I don't know why, my agent started to generate URL and link that did not exist in our documentations. It was perfect during 3 months, and then it started to do something bad. And we changed nothing and stuff like this. That's why I'm sure in the future the model will be more reliable and more stable, and we do not have this kind of hallucination, or maybe we have new tools or new way to constraints to oversee this kind of anomalies, in fact, in the processing. I think in the future, you need to have more reliable LLMs and agents to be able to delegate real job, real work to them.
Interesting. What do you think, Rui? What are you doing today that you think will be not needed in 12 months?
So I think we're doing a lot more manual review of conversations than we will be doing in the future. The bandwidth that a human has for assessing a conversation is really low, a couple of hundred conversations a day, really, if someone's good, moderately complex analysis. And that's not enough. It's fundamentally not enough. To Adrian's point earlier about having continuous testing and the concept of bringing regression testing into generative bots, where you have a relatively large data set, make a change, rerun the data set to understand the impact that you've had across all of your performance. That's literally not feasible at the moment with human labor. You will always need some human oversight. I agree with that, but I think 99% of the analysis is going to move to LLM as a judge, to kind of textual analysis, to understand which conversations humans do need to look at. So I think that's the main one. The amount of manual process that's going on at the moment, both in design, build, and testing, I think is just going to really, really decline.
I'll tell you what I hope changes. I hope there's a lot more attention to infrastructure and the inherent risks associated with that. So obviously, LLMs run not in a vacuum, but on some sort of infrastructure. And at the moment, I foresee a lot more struggles in terms of capacity, in terms of predicting the amount of usage that a user has, in terms of the experimentation. And so I foresee the following topics becoming big in the next 12 months. Model fallback, so what happens if this model fails? Do you have another model to kick in and take over your system? Error handling, and then your multilinear grading, which I think I hope will catch much better importance. They give a lot more safety to a system in production.
Nice. Wicked. Well, thank you so much for your efforts and expertise. I think that the takeaway for me here is that I can't get away from the analogy around accessibility in design, which is the more accessible you make something, the better it is for everyone. And it seems to me that some of the things we've been talking about here are kind of just good practices for building effective and reliable agents. It just so happens that it helps the organization feel more comfortable and manage the risks that are associated to it. So I think that's a great place to end. So please, boys and girls, can you join me in thanking our panel, Adrian, Rui, and Guillaume? Thank you very much.